Some mysteries linger, not in blood, but in the silent ashes of forgotten secrets. Tonight's tale unfolds where a scorched ribbon and a burnt bonnet whisper of love, betrayal, and a shadowed past. We journey to a house where truth has long been concealed beneath layers of fire and silence. Where are you tuning in from, and what hour finds you listening? Let me know in the comments. Now, step quietly with us into the fading smoke and uncover what lies beyond the charred veil. It was on a sullen March morning that I found myself once again in our rooms at Baker Street, the coal fire low in the grate, and the light from the window struggling against a stubborn veil of grey. London, ever reluctant to reveal its heart, had wrapped itself in fog. Not the crisp mist of the countryside, but that particular city-born pall, tinged with soot and melancholy. Holmes sat in his usual chair, cross-legged and silent, his gaze fixed not on the newspapers strewn before him, but on some thought known only to his own intricate mind. The muffled clatter of hooves below mingled with the distant tolling of St. George's bells, yet the world within our quarters remained still. It was in that hush, as I reached for my teacup, that Holmes stirred suddenly and leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. "Observe, Watson," he said softly. "The woman has dropped her defences. And her hat." I rose and followed his gaze to the window. There, through the misted pane, I spied a modest figure retreating down the opposite pavement, accompanied by a man whose stride was clipped with agitation. But it was not the couple that first drew my attention. It was the object lying abandoned near the curb, a small velvet bonnet, plum-coloured, of fashionable but not ostentatious design. The bonnet lay askew, half sodden by the damp, its ribbon trailing like a spent flame. Something about its positioning, not merely lost, but discarded, struck me as vaguely discordant. "You noted the way she refused to turn back," Holmes murmured. He shouted after her twice, but she kept walking. I nodded slowly. "You believe it was hers?" "I'm certain of it," Holmes replied, "and that she meant never to wear it again." The mist shifted just enough to afford a clearer view. The man, tall and slightly stooped, stood with arms raised in helpless entreaty before turning abruptly and vanishing into the swirling grey. The woman had already disappeared from sight. Holmes tapped a finger on the window frame. "There was no accidental drop, Watson. She removed the hat herself. Her posture was resolute, her head uncovered, and her pace unwavering. Whatever has passed between them, it has closed a chapter, perhaps violently, perhaps irrevocably." "Then what are we to make of the bonnet?" I asked. "That, my dear fellow," Holmes said, stepping away from the window, "is what makes this morning more than a passing curiosity. There is resignation in that act, yes, but also rebellion. She left something behind, not simply for the wind and the rain, but for someone to find." Holmes had already fetched his dressing gown and was inspecting the bonnet by the time I had reached the stairs. It had not lain long in the gutter, for its velvet retained a certain warmth, but it was the ribbon, or rather what remained of it, that arrested Holmes' full attention. One end had been scorched, the delicate fabric blackened and brittle, as though it had flirted too long with flame. He held it up with the tweezers he kept near the mantel, and examined the edge with the same clinical eye I had seen applied to gunpowder residue and post-mortem bruising. "See here," he said. "This was not the work of a chimney coal or careless lamp. The burn is deliberate, focused. It began before the hat touched the street." "And what does that suggest?" Holmes offered no answer, only a narrowing of the eyes and a quiet. "It suggests intent." He set the bonnet gently upon the sideboard, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. I recognized the posture at once, a sign not merely of contemplation, but of mental pursuit. The silence in the room seemed to lengthen with the fog outside, both thick with something unseen. After a moment, Holmes spoke in that low tone he reserved for truths not yet proven but already glimpsed. "There is blood in the ash, Watson." I started. "You mean metaphorically?" "Perhaps," he said. Or perhaps, quite literally, this ribbon was burned in haste, and possibly to destroy something more than fabric, something written or stained. A chill ran down my spine that was not born of the London air. Holmes did not elaborate. Instead, he turned back to the window with that quiet certainty of his that a storm, long gathering, was about to break, and that we were already in its path. Scarcely had Holmes delivered his cryptic observation when a soft but deliberate knock drew our attention to the door. Mrs. Hudson, ever composed and discreet, entered a moment later and announced that a young lady wished to see Mr. Holmes at once. Her manner, though as unobtrusive as ever, carried a flicker of concern, which I did not fail to note. The visitor entered with a bearing of quiet dignity, though her complexion was pale and her step uncertain. She removed her gloves with trembling fingers and lowered her veil, revealing features marked not by vanity, but by recent and sincere distress. She was young, no more than 25, and dressed with the modest elegance befitting a governess of good standing. Holmes, having already risen, offered her the armchair closest to the hearth. He did not speak, but regarded her with that grave and searching stillness which had disarmed so many of our past clients. She sank into the chair with a grateful nod, clasping her reticule in both hands, as though it contained something more than her worldly possessions. Perhaps, I thought, a truth not easily surrendered. "My name is Eleanor Varley," she began, her voice soft, but not fragile. "I am employed as governess to the household of Lady Drusilla Halbird in Hampstead." Holmes inclined his head. "And what brings you to me, Miss Varley, on such a morning as this?" She hesitated. "It is Lady Halbird herself, sir. She has taken ill, gravely so, but I fear the cause is not natural." Holmes leaned slightly forward, though his hands remained folded. "Poison, Miss Varley." The girl blinked, startled by the bluntness of the word, but did not deny it. "Yes, or something like it. She is slipping away day by day, and yet there is no diagnosis, no proper symptoms. Only silence and decline." "You suspect someone in the household?" Miss Varley lowered her eyes. "I suspect something, or someone. But I have no proof, Mr. Holmes. Only a—" She paused and glanced at the reticule. "A sign. Something I found last night in the hearth. I brought it with me." Holmes offered no interruption. He had already seen far more than she realised. "I was engaged by Lady Halbird a little over 6 months ago," Miss Varley continued. She had dismissed the previous governess and wished for someone with experience in both the French language and modern literature. Though there are no children in the house, she desired companionship of a respectable kind. I accepted the position with gratitude. She paused, gathering her thoughts. For the first weeks, my lady was lucid, if somewhat withdrawn. She would take tea in the rose parlour and speak of old poetry and coastal summers. But then, something began to shift. She would fall silent in the middle of a sentence. On one occasion, I found her weeping in the library, clutching an old volume as though it had wounded her. Then, quite suddenly, she took to her bed. No fever, no visible cause, only sleep, murmurs, and silence. Holmes steepled his fingers. Was there mention of a name? Perhaps one repeated in those murmurs? Miss Varley nodded slowly. Yes, one name, always the same. Edgar. Watson's pen paused at the name, and Holmes's brows drew faintly together. Already I sensed his mind drawing the first threads taut. "And the item you mentioned," Holmes prompted gently. Without further hesitation, Miss Varley reached into her reticule and withdrew a bonnet shawl, or rather what remained of one. It was of plum velvet, identical in hue to the one we had seen that morning, though time and smoke had dimmed its lustre. One of the ribbons was scorched at the edge, the silk blackened and curled inwards, as though snatched from flame only a moment too late. "I found it in the hearth of the blue drawing-room," she said. No one had used that room in weeks. I cannot imagine how it got there, or who would have tried to destroy it. Holmes took the object with delicate care, holding it at the corners like a sheet of brittle parchment. He turned it once, twice, his expression unreadable, then laid it on the edge of the desk. "It is no ordinary hat," he said softly, "and it has already tried to tell us one truth, if not more." The silence that followed was thick with implication and fear. Miss Varley clasped her hands tightly in her lap and looked toward the window, as if reluctant to speak what pressed upon her mind. "There is something else," she said at length, her voice low. "A feeling I cannot easily name." Holmes waited. "I feel watched," she said simply, "not merely when I walk the halls at night, but even in the light of day. There are rooms that seem to darken when I enter. I have caught whispers behind closed doors, though no one is there. And once, I found the bell pull in my room torn loose, as though someone had grasped it in rage." "Is it the household that unnerves you?" Holmes asked. "I cannot say. Mrs. Cordwainer, the housekeeper, is civil but cold. Felix Halbird, Lady Halbird's nephew, is more courteous, yet there is something in his eyes I cannot bear." Her voice faltered. "It is not just Lady Halbird's health that frightens me, Mr. Holmes. It is the house itself, as if it has been waiting for something or someone to return." Holmes nodded once, and the air seemed to tighten with purpose. Holmes rose and walked to the sideboard where the scorched bonnet still lay, its ruined ribbon like a quiet accusation. He studied it for a moment before speaking. "You brought this to me this morning," he said, "but it was already halfway to me before you arrived." Miss Varley looked puzzled. "We observed it earlier. Its twin, or perhaps this very one, discarded upon the street by a woman who refused to look back. A quarrel had occurred, the sort that severs ties." Her lips parted slightly in surprise, then closed in comprehension. Holmes turned toward me. "Watson, you will make ready to depart within the hour. Miss Varley, we shall accompany you to Hampstead today." "Truly?" she breathed. "You believe there is danger?" "I believe," said Holmes quietly, "that something has been set in motion, something born in secrecy and stoked in silence, and if we do not intervene swiftly, it may consume what remains." There was no drama in his voice, no flourish, only cold precision. It was enough to chill the room, despite the fire's gentle crackle. As I packed my valise, and Holmes gathered his notes with clinical ease, I could not help but glance again at the bonnet resting near the fire. The resemblance to the one we had seen in the gutter was uncanny, too precise for chance, and too deliberate for coincidence. I thought of the name spoken in illness, Edgar, and of the house Miss Varley described, watchful, whispering, steeped in unspoken history. Already, my mind turned toward shadows too large to name, and echoes from lives never fully lived. What struck me most, however, was the quiet congruence between Holmes' morning deduction and the evidence now laid before us. A ribbon touched by flame, a woman who refused to look back, a household drenched in silence. It was not often that a mystery met Holmes halfway, yet here it was, not merely knocking, but already smouldering. We left Baker Street as the fog began to thin, but I carried with me the distinct impression that we were not stepping into a case, but into a conflagration begun long before our arrival. The fog had deepened as we journeyed northward through Hampstead, wreathing the iron fences and leafless trees in a damp shroud of silence. By the time our hired cab turned into the gravel drive that led to Halbird House, the afternoon had dimmed to a colourless gloom, and the world beyond the gatepost seemed forgotten by the sun. The house itself emerged slowly from the mist, a long, ivy-strangled structure of grey stone and shuttered windows, its high gables resembling stooped shoulders bowed by time. There was no smoke from the chimneys, no welcoming light in the hall, only a stillness that pressed down upon us as we approached. Miss Varley stepped out first and glanced at the front door with a visible tightening of her frame. Holmes, ever observant, caught the motion, "You do not relish returning," he murmured. "It is not the house I fear," she replied, "but what the house remembers." The bell was pulled, and after a delay that seemed longer than courtesy allowed, the door opened upon a face that matched the estate in expression, stern, colourless, and strangely resigned. We had arrived, and whatever truths lay inside were already listening. We were ushered into a wide, dim hallway, where the air bore the scent of dust and lavender oil, that curious combination of decay and effort, as though someone were attempting to preserve not the house, but the illusion of life within it. The woman who had admitted us now faced us fully, tall, bony, and clad in greys that seemed to blend with the woodwork. She introduced herself in clipped tones as Mrs. Cordwainer, housekeeper to the Halbird family these 37 years. Her eyes passed over Holmes with a glint of measuring caution, and she barely acknowledged me at all. To Miss Varley, she gave a polite nod, nothing more. "Her ladyship is upstairs," she said. "She wakes only in fragments now. The doctor calls it a nervous disorder, but there is more in it than nerves, if you ask me. Not," she added quickly, "that anyone has." Holmes offered no comment. He was already studying the staircase, the faded portraits lining the wall, the unnatural hush that seemed to cling to the wainscoting like mould. It was a silence not of peace, but of long unspoken things, of grief, perhaps, or guilt. Mrs. Cordwainer led us up a broad, creaking staircase to the eastern wing, where a heavy door stood ajar. Inside, the bedchamber was dim and hushed, its heavy curtains drawn, the only illumination coming from a single oil lamp beside the bed. Lady Halbird lay nestled beneath a mound of woolen blankets, her form scarcely visible, like a figure receding into fog. Her face, though lined, retained traces of beauty, a high brow, delicate cheekbones, and the kind of mouth formed more for poetry than command. But now her features were slack with exhaustion, her eyelids fluttering faintly as though in search of some forgotten name. "She speaks little," Mrs. Cordwainer whispered. "When she does, it's rarely to the present." Holmes approached the bedside silently. Lady Halbird stirred, her head turning slightly, and a tremulous voice escaped her lips. "Edgar, the hat box." Holmes froze. There was a long pause before the lady sighed once and sank back into sleep. Holmes turned slowly toward me. He said nothing, but the glance he gave me held an unmistakable gleam. The puzzle had offered its first true thread. As we descended once more to the lower floor, a figure emerged from the library, tall, thin, and unnervingly still. He paused, and then stepped forward with an expression that strove for civility but did not quite reach the eyes. "Felix Halbird," he said with a bow. "I gather you are here at the request of Miss Varley." Holmes inclined his head. "We come as observers, Mr. Halbird. No more. At least, not yet." Felix gave a strained smile. His skin was unusually pale, his gaze direct but without warmth. There was something curious in his bearing, a stiffness not born of pride but of restraint, as though he were a man trained long ago to hide what he could not afford to show. "My aunt is delicate," he said. "We would prefer no disturbance." "We shall endeavour to tread quietly," Holmes replied. Felix gave a curt nod and vanished into the study once more. "Did you observe his hands, Watson?" Holmes murmured as we moved on. "One bears ink, the other faint soot. A curious pairing. Indeed, I had noticed, but it was Holmes who had already begun to weigh their meaning." After our brief encounter with Felix, Holmes directed his attention back to the drawing room, where the remnants of a dying fire still cast a faint glow upon the hearth. As he crouched before the hearth, his eyes swept with surgical precision over the charred embers and the cracked bricks lining the fireplace. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The brickwork here bears the marks of recent disturbance." With deft fingers, Holmes pried away one of the bricks, revealing a narrow cavity behind. Inside lay a small, soot-blackened hat box, its lacquer dulled and edges singed as if caught in a sudden blaze. The box was surprisingly heavy, and as Holmes lifted it, A faint scent of smoke and something far fouler rose to greet us. We exchanged a glance. This discovery was no accident but a carefully concealed secret, hidden in plain sight within the heart of the house. Whatever it contained, I could tell it held weighty importance. Holmes placed the box carefully upon the table. We are beginning to understand that the fires are no mere accident. The search then led us to a narrow pantry off the kitchen, a place long neglected and redolent of dust and old wood. Holmes's keen gaze immediately sought the shelves, where jars and bottles rested in patient anonymity. Among these, one small bottle caught his eye, a dark glass vial sealed with a cork stopper, though the seal was not intact. He removed it gently and turned the label towards the light, reading aloud in a calm, measured voice. Belladonna. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was well known to us both as a potent poison in small doses, capable of mimicking natural illness while slowly sapping vitality. Holmes uncorked the bottle briefly, sniffing the contents. The faint, sweet odour was unmistakable, yet the stopper had been disturbed, as if someone had attempted to use or conceal it in haste. "Watson," he said quietly, "this is the first tangible proof of malice lurking beneath the veneer of illness. The weapon lies not in the visible wound, but in the unseen breath of death." Holmes's scrutiny next fell upon the grate of the study, a chamber of faded opulence and heavy curtains drawn against the drear light. With practiced care, he manipulated the ironwork and dusted away the soot until a small, charred remnant of paper was revealed, wedged stubbornly between the bars. Drawing it forth, he unfolded the fragment with reverence, revealing the fragile script of a love letter, blackened and incomplete. "My dearest Edgar," the opening words declared, penned in a delicate, almost trembling hand. The sight of the name struck me with a sudden pang, recalling Lady Halbird's fevered murmurs. The letter bore the marks of attempted destruction, as though someone had tried to reduce it to ash and smoke. But the paper resisted total annihilation. Holmes traced the curling edges of the fragment thoughtfully. "This letter is a voice crying out from the past, Watson. It is a confession, a promise, and perhaps a curse." His eyes met mine with an intensity that bespoke deeper secrets hidden beneath the surface of that single name. As Holmes paused, the weight of the house itself seemed to settle upon us, a silence so profound it was almost tangible, pressing close as though to stifle breath and thought alike. He turned to me, his gaze piercing through the gloom. "This house," he whispered, "has learned not to breathe too loudly." I understood at once what he meant. An air of repression had settled here, born of unspoken guilt and memories that dared not surface. The very walls seemed to hold their breath, hiding whispers and footsteps long since vanished. The question that lingered between us was as heavy as the stillness. What had been concealed so deeply that even the house dared not speak its name? Holmes's fingers tightened briefly on my arm. "Prepare yourself, Watson. The heart of this mystery beats in the quietest shadows." Holmes regarded the worn staircase leading to the upper floor with an expression both curious and commanding. "We must ascend, Watson," he said quietly. "There is a truth waiting in the dust." Mrs. Cordwainer, summoned by Holmes's request, hesitated noticeably. Her eyes narrowed, and a faint tremor crept into her usually resolute manner. "The attic and nursery wing, sir. They have been long disused, ever since the child's passing. The timbers groan, and the air is heavy with neglect. It is not a place for the faint-hearted." Holmes gave no sign of hesitation. "Neglect may preserve as surely as care. We must see it for ourselves." With a reluctant nod, the housekeeper led the way. The stairs creaked beneath our weight, and an oppressive stillness settled around us as we reached the heavy door. It yielded reluctantly to Holmes's steady hand, revealing a chamber thick with dust and shadows, long untouched by time or human presence. Within the nursery, the silence was almost tangible, broken only by the soft hiss of settling dust disturbed by our entrance. The faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the air hung heavy with the scent of forgotten years. Amid the decay, a small object caught my eye. A child's toy rabbit, its fur matted but its form surprisingly intact, tucked away behind a loose panel of wainscoting. The sight of that innocent plaything in such a desolate place struck a chord of melancholy within me. It was as though the very room held its breath in mourning, preserving a last remnant of laughter long stilled. Holmes stooped beside me, his gaze sharp. An emblem of innocence, Watson, preserved amidst neglect, a silent witness to secrets buried beneath dust and time. His words lingered in the still air as our eyes met, and I understood that we had stepped into the heart of a story whose echoes reached far beyond the faded walls. Holmes's fingers trailed lightly along the wainscoting until they rested upon a section of plaster faintly scratched and uneven. Drawing closer, we discerned a single word, nearly effaced by time's hand. Edgar. The name was etched with a trembling hand, its lines blurred but unmistakable. I could not help but think of Lady Halberd's fevered murmurs and the letter fragment we had found. The connection was no longer vague suspicion, but a thread-pulling taut. Holmes's voice was low, barely more than a whisper. A name given, yet a story half told. This inscription speaks of remembrance, or perhaps accusation. The significance weighed upon us like the very dust that hung suspended in the air. It was a name unfinished, a presence unresolved. The nursery, once a place of joy, now seemed to cradle a secret that refused to be silenced. Later, in a quiet moment away from the household's watchful eyes, Eleanor confided in me with a guarded softness. Lady Halbird once spoke of a child, born in secrecy and disfavour, she began, her voice steady but shaded with sorrow. She bore a son, out of wedlock, a scandal that was swiftly hushed by family decree. The infant was said to have died shortly after birth, but whispers persist of a fate less certain, a life hidden rather than lost. Eleanor's gaze faltered, as though recalling forbidden memories. The nursery was locked away, not merely for neglect, but to conceal what no visitor was meant to find. Her words hung between us like a fragile glass, trembling with the weight of half-truths and untold pain. Holmes listened intently, his eyes distant, as if piecing together fragments of a broken tapestry whose pattern was still unclear. Holmes turned his keen intellect to the implications of Eleanor's revelation. "Watson," he remarked thoughtfully, "burial is not always synonymous with death. There are secrets so carefully buried, they wear the guise of absence." He paused, weighing the gravity of what lay before us. To conceal a child is to rewrite a lineage, to sever a branch without severing its shadow. The repercussions of such concealment ripple outward, staining the present with the sins of the past. I could see that Holmes regarded the matter not only as a mystery of fact, but of morality, the tangled web of family, honour and shame that often underpin the darkest of crimes. Whatever truth is hidden here, Holmes concluded, it is not easily extinguished. His words steeled us for the confrontations yet to come. As we descended the staircase, Holmes's sharp eye caught a tense exchange near the bottom. Felix Halbird, confronting Eleanor Varley with a vehemence that betrayed far more than mere impatience. His words were low and sharp, but his glance was harder still, and in his hand he held a small box of matches. Holmes's attention was drawn immediately to the slender ribbon tied about the matchbox. A ribbon burned ragged at one end, its edges blackened as if singed by fire's breath. "Notice, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "how the smallest detail can speak volumes. That ribbon is no accident. It mirrors the scorched bonnet that has haunted our investigation." Felix's eyes flickered, and he tightened his grip upon the matches. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken threats and hidden resentments. I observed the subtle but unmistakable tension that passed between Felix and Eleanor. A fraught history layered beneath their words, heavy with accusation and fear. Holmes, ever inscrutable, made no immediate comment. But I knew that in his mind, the puzzle pieces were clicking steadily into place. Later that evening, as the household settled into uneasy silence, Holmes shared a rare moment of reflection with me beside the dying embers of the drawing-room fire. "Names, Watson," he mused softly, "are not always given to the dead. They linger beyond the grave in whispered echoes and unfinished business." His gaze was fixed on the flickering flames, as though they might reveal hidden truths in their dancing shadows. There is a weight to an unspoken name, a burden carried by those left behind, or sometimes by those who wish to bury the past entirely. Holmes's hands rested lightly upon a worn volume of poetry, a silent testament to the fragile human connections entwined in our case. "We must tread carefully, Watson, for the truth we seek lies buried beneath layers of grief, pride, and a fear of shame. It is a delicate thread, and if pulled too harshly, it may unravel the fabric of more than one life." His words lingered, a solemn warning that the heart of the mystery was far from mere facts. It was a question of honour and humanity. The night had settled heavily over Halbird House, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of settling timbers and the distant call of a nightbird. I was just drawing the curtains to close when a sudden, piercing scream shattered the stillness. It was a raw, terrified sound, not of this world's calm fears, but of immediate, mortal dread. Almost at once, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor, quick and erratic, followed by the unmistakable scent of smoke seeping beneath our door. Holmes sprang from his chair, his keen eyes already alight with urgent purpose. We rushed out into the corridor to find servants struggling with a heavy, wooden door, behind which the air was thick with choking fumes. The scream had come from Eleanor's room, and the sound of her coughing confirmed our worst fears. Smoke curled about the keyhole like a living thing, and every instant seemed charged with silent menace. At length, the door gave way, and we found Miss Varley crouched near the window, her face flushed with choking distress. She coughed violently as Holmes and I rushed to her side, shielding her from the smoke that still lingered like a cruel wraith. Beneath the door lay scorched fragments of fabric, singed and curled as though consumed by a small but deliberate flame. It was evident that the smoke had been carefully generated to force her from her chamber, to drive her out into the open where danger surely awaited. Eleanor's eyes were wide with terror as she looked at us. "Someone tried to burn me out," she whispered hoarsely. "I do not know who or why, but I fear it is connected to the sickness that haunts Lady Halbird." Holmes examined the burnt fabric, his expression one of grim calculation. "This is no accident, Watson," he said quietly. "It is an act of malice, deliberate and methodical." No sooner had we secured Eleanor than another commotion arose. From her chamber came a faint, desperate sound, and Mrs. Cordwainer hastened in, pale and breathless. Lady Halbird had succumbed once more to unconsciousness, her frail frame sapped by some unseen torment. Felix was at her side, visibly shaken, his usual composure fractured by fear and perhaps remorse. "It is her nerves," he muttered, casting a furtive glance toward us. "Too much strain, too many fears crowding upon her. She is but a fragile vessel, Watson." Holmes regarded Felix with keen suspicion, though he offered no contradiction. "Nerves," he mused aloud, "can be the mask for 1,000 deeper wounds." The house seemed to contract around us, the shadows gathering heavier than ever, as we braced ourselves for what the coming hours might reveal. Once Eleanor had been tended and Lady Halbird settled, Holmes turned his attention to the site of the attempted arson. He knelt by the doorway, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning the floor and the threshold. I watched as he noted the absence of candle wax drips or the usual telltale signs of accidental ignition. The scorch marks bore the precision of a hand, skilled in concealment and intent. Holmes then extended his inspection to the adjoining hallways and windows, ensuring no other point of entry or escape had been overlooked. His fingers probed lightly at the doorframe, testing its strength and noting a faint smear of something. Perhaps blood or rust. Deliberate, he declared softly. This was no reckless act, but a calculated attempt to frighten, or worse. I felt a chill settle upon me at the implications. Someone within that household was determined to wield fire as a weapon, and with it, wield fear. Later, in the drawing room, Holmes's attention returned once more to the hearth. The flickering embers cast long shadows as he traced the floorboards with a practiced hand, tapping methodically upon their surfaces. At length, a hollow note betrayed a loose plank near the hearth. Holmes pried it carefully upwards, revealing beneath a shallow cavity in the floor a small dusty box long hidden from sight. We exchanged a glance. Such a concealment bespoke secrets desperate to remain unseen. The box was worn, its leather cracked with age, but inside lay objects that would shift the course of our inquiry. Holmes extracted an old iron key, its surface dull but unmistakably forged for some purpose. Alongside it was a single right-hand glove, stained darkly in a manner I dared not guess, and nestled among these was a fragment of fabric, the last remnant of the scorched ribbon that had so captivated our attention since the day began. This discovery, more than any before, confirmed that our search was no longer one of mere curiosity, but a race to uncover truths long buried beneath ash and silence. Holmes lifted the iron key and examined it closely under the lamplight, noting its heavy, ancient design. It was no ordinary key, but one fashioned for a lock of some consequence, perhaps a strongbox or a concealed compartment. The glove, once white, but now darkened beyond recognition, was of fine quality, suggestive of a gentleman's hand, yet stained in a manner that bespoke violence or haste. Most telling, however, was the fragment of ribbon, the very edge charred, curling away as though still smouldering. Holmes held it delicately, as if it might crumble beneath the weight of its own secrets. "This trio," Holmes said quietly, "is a silent testimony, the key to a hidden story, the glove of a hand grown desperate, and the ribbon that binds past to present." The room felt heavier with each word. I saw in Holmes's eyes a flicker of urgency, a knowledge that we had drawn ever closer to the heart of the mystery, and that the revelation might not bring peace. As I pondered the grim evidence before us, I could not suppress the rising tide of unease that welled within my breast. What manner of peril awaited those ensnared by such dark deeds? What shadows lurked behind the genteel facades? Holmes, ever the master of calm, sat back in his chair, hands folded, eyes fixed beyond the walls of that ancient room, as if reading secrets invisible to the rest of us. His silence was a lesson in itself, that the truth was neither quick nor kind, but required patience, perseverance, and the steady hand of reason. I found myself reflecting upon the curious nature of human malice, how it often grows in the quiet corners of trust, festering unseen until it bursts forth in violence or despair. Though the path ahead seemed fraught, I felt reassured by Holmes' presence. For if any man could navigate the treacherous waters of deception, it was he. Yet in the depths of my heart, I knew the hour of reckoning drew nigh, and that the revelations soon to come would test us all in ways unexpected. In the quiet hours that followed the smothering smoke and sudden chaos, Holmes confided to me his evolving theory of the events. He believed the recent blaze that had threatened Eleanor was no reckless accident, but a carefully contrived reenactment, a staged echo of a tragedy long past. "This fire," he said, "is not meant to consume flesh or bone, but memory and evidence. The flames are a veil, Watson, obscuring something far older and far more dangerous." He spoke with the calm certainty that so often preceded a leap of insight, and I felt the familiar stir of anticipation that Holmes's mind was reaching into the darkness and beginning to pull forth its secrets. The past has a habit of returning not as it was, but as it needs to be remembered or forgotten. His words settled over the room like the dying embers of a fire that still threatened to flare anew. Holmes, with his usual discretion, took swift measures to safeguard Eleanor. Under the cloak of night, arrangements were made for her immediate removal to a modest inn within the city, far from the brooding shadows of Halbird House. He entrusted her protection to Inspector Morton, a man of discreet habits and steadfast loyalty, well accustomed to the delicate balance between justice and secrecy. "Miss Varley must be shielded from further harm," Holmes said quietly, "for there are forces at work in Hampstead that move with malice and cunning." Eleanor herself appeared both relieved and anxious, torn between duty and self-preservation. Holmes's solemn assurance seemed to bolster her resolve, yet I saw in her eyes the lingering fear that clung to her spirit. As the carriage bore her away, I knew that the stakes had grown higher and the path ahead fraught with more peril than we had yet imagined. To the assembled household, Holmes delivered a performance of equal parts candour and deception. In a carefully staged argument with me, he raised his voice in irritation over what he called the increasing complexities of this affair, declaring his intention to return to London at once. "I cannot remain here any longer," he said, "not with matters growing so delicate." Felix Halbird watched with a calculating eye. While Mrs. Cordwainer's lips pressed into a thin line, Eleanor had already been removed, and the tension in the room was palpable. This charade, while convincing on the surface, was a mask for the true motions of our investigation. Holmes had no intention of departing. Instead, he planned to conceal himself within the house, gathering evidence unseen and unheard. As the household settled, the final act of this quiet drama was only just beginning. A trap set in silence and shadow, designed to catch the hand that had struck beneath the veneer of respectability. Following instructions given in hushed tones, I departed with the hired cab, leaving Holmes to his solitary vigil. The night swallowed my figure as I receded down the road, unaware of the patient game now unfolding within the walls of Halbird House. Holmes, with the utmost care, slipped back through the servants' entrance, his movements ghost-like and untraceable. He selected a concealed alcove within the drawing room to observe the household unnoticed, blending with shadows as though part of the very fabric of the house. In that stillness, the weight of expectation settled over him. He waited not for a single clue, but for the very footsteps of fate to echo through the hollow spaces above. Thus began a watch that would test patience, nerve, and intellect, and that would bring to light secrets long kept in darkness. As the hours wore on, the silence was broken only by the creaking of ancient timbers and the softest of sounds. Faint footfalls above us, cautious and deliberate. Holmes's eyes sharpened, his body taut with alertness. He crept to the corner where the ceiling joined the wall and listened intently. The faint scraping of shoes on dust, the barely audible shift of weight from one foot to another. These were the marks of a visitor who believed themselves unseen. Holmes whispered, "They move with care, but not with innocence." The footsteps passed directly overhead, crossing the attic floorboards, pausing near what Holmes knew to be the old storage trunks. It was a breath held, suspended in time, the moment before revelation or ruin. His gaze met mine, dark and unyielding. The trap was set. Now it awaited its quarry. From his hidden vantage, Holmes saw a figure emerge from the stairwell, Felix Halbird himself, his movements furtive and guarded. With gloved hands, he lifted the lid of an ancient trunk, revealing its contents in the dim light. Among old garments and faded linens lay a velvet bonnet, its ribbon intact, but unmistakably the twin of the one scorched beyond repair. Felix's fingers trembled as he handled the relic, his face a mask of conflicted emotion, reverence, fear, and something darker, less easily named. Holmes's voice, Barely more than a breath broke the silence. "You cannot hide forever, Felix." Caught unawares, Felix's eyes darted about, searching for an escape, but none came. The bonnet was a talisman of guilt and history, the final piece in a puzzle long set. Felix closed the trunk with a shudder, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the unspoken confessions. The house held its breath as two wills confronted, the detective's resolve against the haunted nephew's despair. In the dim lamplight of the concealed corner, Felix's voice emerged, brittle yet resigned. He confessed to staging the recent fire, an act born not from a desire to harm, but to frighten Eleanor into silence. "I feared what she might uncover," he said, his words halting. "There are truths better left buried, secrets that must not see the light. The past, it is a shadow that follows relentlessly." Yet even as he spoke, a guardedness remained, as though a deeper confession lay just beyond reach. His eyes, darting and evasive, revealed a torment not easily quelled. Holmes pressed gently but firmly, his tone softening, inviting candor. "What is it you withhold, Felix? What is the heart of this shadow?" Felix's jaw tightened, and for a moment, no answer came. Then, with a bitter laugh, he said, "Some flames burn not to cleanse, but to consume everything, even those who kindle them." The weight of his words lingered, as did the sense that the darkest truths were yet to be revealed. Truths that would challenge even Holmes's extraordinary acumen. Holmes summoned the entire household to the drawing room, a space heavy with silence and anticipation. One by one, they entered. Mrs. Cordwainer, with her stern, unreadable face. Eleanor, pale and tense. Felix, his posture rigid, his eyes darting beneath the lowered brows. Holmes's manner was calm, yet beneath the surface lay a quiet resolve that commanded the room's attention. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as though weighing each word on a scale invisible to all but himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are assembled not merely to recount events, but to unveil truths long concealed." His eyes, sharp and unyielding, rested last upon Felix, who shrank slightly beneath the gaze. The fire crackled low, casting dancing shadows that seemed to echo the unrest in the room. It was clear that the final act of this tragic play was at hand. Holmes produced the second bonnet, its velvet as plum in hue as the scorched twin, but untouched by flame. He laid it gently upon the table and let the room absorb the significance. "This bonnet," he declared, "never left the attic. It was preserved carefully, not as a mere keepsake, but as a weapon of deceit." He turned the scorched ribbon toward them. The burned bonnet found in the hearth was planted, a decoy meant to incriminate Lady Halbird and obscure the true author of these dark designs. A murmur rippled through the assembled, but Holmes silenced it with a glance. It was a calculated lie woven from fabric and fire. Holmes fixed his gaze on Felix. "You sought to frighten Eleanor into flight, did you not? To drive her away before she could uncover the secrets your family has laboured to hide." Felix's face tightened, but he did not deny the accusation. "Fear is a powerful ally," Holmes continued, "and you wielded it with precision. The smoke, the fire, all orchestrated to create panic, to silence a voice that threatened exposure." Eleanor's eyes flickered with a mixture of relief and lingering fear, while Mrs. Cordwainer's lips pressed into a tight line. Holmes's voice dropped to a measured tone. "But terror can also provoke courage, and silence often invites the loudest echoes of truth." Holmes's voice grew softer, more measured, as he turned to the heart of the matter. Edgar was not the child many believed him to be. The room seemed to hold its breath. He was Lady Halberd's lover, a man whose presence in this household was buried beneath layers of shame and denial. Felix's countenance paled, a flicker of pain passing across his features. "More than this," Holmes said, "Edgar was your father, Felix, The bloodline you have denied is the very root of this tangled affair. Felix clenched his fists, the weight of the revelation settling like a stone in the room. This truth, Holmes added, has poisoned the legacy of the Halbird name, twisting pride into desperate acts, and silencing love with threats and fire. The moment was heavy with unspoken sorrow, as the fractured family confronted the wounds of its past. Holmes unfolded the motives with surgical precision. The crux lies in a will, a document older than the present turmoil, naming Edgar's kin as rightful heirs to Lady Halbird's estate. His gaze swept the room, resting briefly on Felix. To secure your position, you endeavoured to erase that will from memory and paper. Felix's jaw tightened, but Holmes pressed on. By poisoning Lady Halbird and fabricating evidence against her, you sought to extinguish not only her life, but the truth she carried. He paused, allowing the weight of the accusation to settle. Pride, twisted by fear and rejection, compelled you to silence a lineage that threatened your claim. Felix's eyes darkened, the storm within and barely contained, Holmes concluded. But such legacies built on poison are fragile, destined to crumble under the scrutiny of reason and time. Felix's composure finally broke, his voice rising with anguished fury, not in repentance, but wounded pride. You speak as if I am a villain, he spat, as if my only inheritance is shame. His hands trembled, his gaze blazing with a fierce, almost desperate light. My mother loved a man who was not mine, and from that love I was born. She gave all her heart to a shadow, a ghost. And what of me? A son cast aside, living in a house haunted by phantoms. His voice cracked, the years of resentment pouring forth like a flood. Do you think I sought to harm her? I sought only to protect what little was left of my name, to defend the fragile house that raised me against ghosts of a past that would consume us all. Holmes watched him with quiet intensity, unmoved, but understanding the torment beneath. The room was silent, but for the echo of Felix's cry, a sorrowful roar that burned into the very soul of the household. Once safely ensconced once more within the familiar precincts of Baker Street, Holmes and I settled before the fire, the dense fog that had clung to Hampstead gradually lifting from both the city and our minds. The evening's quiet afforded us the opportunity to untangle the labyrinthine threads of the mystery, that tangle of smoke and shadow from which the truth now emerged with measured clarity. Holmes, always the consummate analyst, began to unravel the facts, his voice calm but imbued with the gravitas befitting the revelations. Each clue, from the scorched bonnet to the charred letter and the hidden key, revealed itself as a chapter in a story far greater than mere illness or accident. I found myself drawn into the sharp focus of his reasoning, a clarity that transformed confusion into order, suspicion into certainty. It was as if the very fog of the past had been lifted, leaving bare the sombre truths beneath. Holmes explained that the existence of two identical bonnets, one preserved carefully in the attic, the other found scorched in the hearth, was no mere coincidence. The damaged bonnet was a deliberate fabrication, a token planted to insinuate guilt upon Lady Halbird and obscure the real source of the malice that had pervaded the household. This, Holmes said, was a stratagem designed not to inflict harm through fire, but to kindle suspicion and confusion. The burnt bonnet served as a signpost, pointing away from the true culprit and towards a woman already fragile and forgotten. His fingers traced the fragile edges of the scorched ribbon. It was a weapon of deception, fashioned from sorrow and smoke. This subtle manipulation of appearance over reality was a motif Holmes had often encountered, a reminder that truth, like fire, could be concealed beneath layers of ash and illusion. Holmes then turned to the fragment of the love letter discovered lodged within the study grate. Despite its charred and brittle state, the letter had resisted complete destruction, an act, no doubt, that betrayed the desperation of its would-be eraser. My dearest Edgar, Holmes recited softly, his voice threading through the room like a reverent invocation. This fragment is the emotional fulcrum of our case, a testament to a love unfulfilled and a secret fiercely guarded. He went on to elaborate how the letter's partial survival offered not only a clue to the identity of Edgar, but also a window into the fractured affections that had shaped the household's sorrowful present. The charred paper was more than a mere relic. It was a voice reaching out from the past, threatening to reveal truths some wished to keep buried. Holmes regarded the letter as a symbol of both vulnerability and menace, a reminder that the heart's secrets often endure long after the hand that penned them has turned cold. Next, Holmes recounted the discovery of the belladonna bottle, a silent witness to the slow, methodical poisoning that had masqueraded as natural decline. Belladonna, he explained, is a toxin as insidious as it is potent. Administered in measured doses, it can simulate the wasting symptoms of an illness, evading suspicion while sapping vitality. Holmes described how the poisoner's intent was not swift death, but prolonged affliction, a cruel mimicry of nature's own decay. The weapon was subtle, Holmes remarked, designed to be mistaken for fate or frailty, leaving the victim trapped in a limbo of suffering. The quiet efficacy of such a method bespoke a mind both cold and calculating, willing to cloak murder in the garb of inevitability. As Holmes's words settled upon me, I was struck anew by the dark ingenuity that often lay beneath seemingly inexplicable tragedies. Holmes then revealed the contents of the small box uncovered beneath the loose floorboard, an old iron key and a second long-forgotten will. The will named Eleanor Varley as beneficiary, a quiet testament to Lady Halberd's trust in her faithful governess. This document, Holmes said, has lain concealed for years, overshadowed by a later will whose existence was preserved only by secrecy and artifice. The key, he explained, unlocked a cabinet where the will had been hidden, a final safeguard against the unravelling of family secrets. Holmes reflected on the significance of Eleanor's inheritance, a gesture both practical and symbolic, signifying the transfer not merely of property, but of trust and legacy. It was a quiet bequest, free from the ostentation that so often accompanied such matters, yet fraught with the weight of unspoken loyalty. In this revelation, the tangled motives of the household found a measure of resolution, and a modest justice was served at last. Holmes's reflections turned philosophical as he contemplated the deeper tragedy behind the crime. The true wound here, he said, is not the poison nor the fire, but the decades of concealment, the illegitimacy shrouded in silence, and the pride that demands secrets be kept at any cost. He mused upon the corrosive nature of shame and its power to warp relationships and moral judgment alike. This is a house burdened not only by loss, but by the weight of social expectations and the dread of scandal, a dread that poisoned hearts and minds long before any overt act of malice. Holmes regarded the case not only as a puzzle of facts, but as a study in human frailty, honour, and the devastating effects of secrecy. Sometimes, he concluded, the greatest crime is that which festers in shadows, invisible yet all-consuming. His words hung in the air, a solemn reminder of the complexities behind every whispered tale and hushed confession. The final scene unfolded with a quiet dignity. Eleanor, away from prying eyes and idle tongues, received the inheritance that Lady Halberd had entrusted to her. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, only a subdued acknowledgement of duty fulfilled and trust repaid. I observed her closely, her face calm, yet etched with the traces of the trials she had endured. The weight of the past seemed to settle upon her shoulders, tempered by a newfound resolve. There was no bitterness, no rancour toward those who had kept secrets or sought to suppress truth. Instead, there was a silence that spoke of acceptance and the fragile peace that comes when burdens are finally laid down. As I watched her depart, I reflected on the fragile nature of names and legacies, how some are lost, not in scandal or violence, but in the quiet passage of loyalty and sacrifice. Thus, the tale of the hat with the burned ribbon drew to a close, not with the clang of justice alone, but with the soft murmur of lives forever altered. As the last vestiges of the case settled into memory, I found myself unable to dismiss a lingering heaviness that clung to my thoughts like a fog. Though justice had been wrought and the mystery unravelled, the human cost, the silent grief, the scars invisible to the law, remained. Holmes sat opposite me, his posture unyielding yet weary, as though the weight of truth pressed upon him as much as any mortal. "There are cases," I said softly, "that leave one pondering the limits of reason and the fragile boundaries between right and wrong. We had unveiled long-buried secrets and laid bare the faults of pride and fear, yet the scars left on those involved seemed beyond remedy. It was a victory shrouded in melancholy, a resolution too late to mend all wounds." As the fire's glow softened, I ventured to ask Holmes a question that had troubled me deeply throughout our inquiry. "Do you, Holmes, ever find that some cases haunt you long after the final word? That truth, when it arrives too late, offers no solace to the broken hearts left behind." He regarded me with that characteristic steadiness, the calm flame of intellect undimmed by emotion. "Watson," he replied quietly, "there are truths so potent that they unsettle the soul, yet the pursuit of truth is the only balm for the wounds of ignorance and deceit." His voice bore no regret, only the resolute acceptance of the burdens his profession imposed. "It is the nature of our calling that some flames burn not to illuminate, but to consume." Holmes mused further on the symbolism of fire, a force that can both purify and destroy. "Fire," he said thoughtfully, "is often wielded to erase memory, to obliterate evidence and to silence the past. Yet no matter how fiercely the flames rage, they fail to consume all that is held in the human heart." He tapped the ashes gently. "Memories smoulder beneath, waiting for the slightest breath to rekindle them. Consider the scorched ribbon, Watson. It was meant to erase a presence, to burn away the ties that bound, but instead it only highlighted the truth it sought to hide." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The futility of flames lies in their incompleteness. They may destroy objects, but not the indelible marks left upon conscience and time." His reflection was both a meditation and a warning. The past is never truly lost, and its embers will inevitably flare. We stepped into the London night, the streets slick with a fine, persistent rain that fell softly, washing the city clean of dust and shadow. The chill in the air was dampened by the gentle cadence of drops, each a quiet extinguishing of the day's labours. Holmes's pipe glowed faintly as he lit it, the embers sputtering against the rain's delicate assault. The final breath of smoke curled briefly before fading into the dampness, as if even his pipe acknowledged the silent end to this chapter. The rain seemed to cleanse more than just the physical streets. It was a quiet benediction upon the scars left behind, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can find some measure of peace over time. We walked without words, the steady rhythm of our footsteps mingling with the city's nocturnal hymn, each step a gentle turning of the page. As we moved through the silent streets, Holmes spoke once more, his voice low and grave. "The offences that bring men before the law are seldom the first wrongs committed. More often, they are the visible tip of long-buried injuries, betrayals, silences, and secrets sustained across years." He paused thoughtfully. "The real crimes are those hidden in the silences of families, the wounds carried in pride and shame, the resentments that fester unnoticed." Holmes's eyes met mine. "Our task is not merely to expose the act, but to understand the shadow from which it sprang." His words held a solemn truth, that justice, while necessary, often arrives after the damage has been done, and that the past lingers, shaping destinies beyond the courtroom. The rain continued to fall as Holmes and I fell into a companionable silence, each lost in thought yet bound by shared purpose. The city around us softened beneath the gentle cascade, and the night embraced us with its quietude. There was no need for speech. The case receded behind us, yet an indefinable weight lingered in the air, a subtle reminder that some mysteries remain partially veiled. As we walked side by side, I pondered the fragile line between truth and memory, justice and mercy, and the quiet sacrifices made in their shadow. In that moment, the world felt both vast and intimately small, filled with secrets yet to be unearthed. And so our journey, for now, reached its close. Beneath the steady rain and the watchful gaze of the city's fading lights, as we settled once more by the fire, Holmes turned to me with a quiet gravity. "Watson, in this case, the true malady was never merely poison or fire, but the corrosive power of pride and secrecy, shadows far darker than any flame. It reminds us that the deepest wounds often lie buried beneath the surface, where only patience and insight may uncover them." He paused, then asked thoughtfully, "Tell me, what do you think was the criminal's greatest misstep that led to his undoing? If this mystery intrigued you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. For more tales of deduction and intrigue, do subscribe and share this story with fellow lovers of the art of investigation.